All right, and we're live. You're listening to Interchain FM, your podcast about all things interoperability, DeFi, and NFTs. I'm your host, Django Unchained. I know that there's a lot of drama right now, and that might be the more interesting thing that you might want to be paying attention to. But again, it's not going to take you further come the next cycle, right? So, congratulations for being here if you're here, and congratulations for still being in the market and listening to this podcast if you're still in the market. So that's yeah, you're going to be good for the next time around. So today we're here with Sergey from, is it Sergey or Sergey?
Sergey, but
Sergey
anything
from,
is fine. Anything
yeah.
goes in the universe. So
We're here with Sergey, the co-founder of Axelar, and he's been here on Interchain FM 1 year ago. So if you haven't listened to that, please do for the primer. We're not going to go over the basics of Axelar. As you know, it's an omnidirectional bridge between EVM chains and Cosmos app chains. So, and it's been the canonical bridge for Osmosis since at least for half a year now. And it's one of the few bridges that hasn't been hacked yet. Knock on wood. So, yeah, thank you for being here, Sergey. And let's talk about some updates that you guys have. What's going on?
awesome. No, great to be here. Yeah, like you said, we went live with the network about 6 months ago, right? Since then, I think quite a lot of traction, quite a lot of volume. I think we generated like close to 1.6 billion in cross-chain volume. A lot of it is between Cosmos and other, EVM ecosystems. I think when UST kind of was going down, we helped to bring a lot of like stable liquidity into the Cosmos ecosystem with USDC, DAI, like Tether and other assets. So yeah, and now to date we've connected 30 different chains through the stack. Everything from a bunch of Cosmos chains, right? Like Osmosis, Cosmos, Kujira, Juno, a lot of EVM chains. So we just announced Arbitrum a couple of days ago that went live on the network. Ethereum, Avalanche, Polygon, a lot of other chains have been built, and yeah, I think we continue to work towards this interchain future, right? That we're all been working and all looking forward to. And I think there's still a lot of work to do, but I think I'm super excited to see the next generation of applications actually starting to come live, right? Using these technologies, and interchain technologies. Everything from like direct deposits to Osmosis that are becoming easier and easier every day, to various like cross-chain like swaps and liquidity layers and things like that. So yeah, kind of super excited for what's coming ahead.
Yes. And just so everyone who's listening live is aware, our channel is now monetized. And if you want to ask questions or add some comments, then you can do so through super chats. At the very end of the show, we're going to pull up anything that you want to say or ask to Sergey, and then we'll go from there. So, Sergey, the thing that I keep getting asked by people who are more or less tourists in the space in the last year is, where is this whole thing going? And now that everything's blown up, where are the fundamentals? So where do you think this space is going now that there's not so much capital propping it up, and past the marketing fluff?
Yeah. So first of all, I still think there's quite a lot of like fiat and cash capital to be injected in the market that's sitting behind the scenes, right? So like same like at Axelar, I think we've raised some healthy capital during the last few years from investors. A lot of investors as well, they actually raise capital from their LPs, right? So I think I actually spoke with somebody, and they mentioned there's like over 20 billion of actual capital to be injected into projects that are here to build and here to stay and continue for the long-term future. So while the public markets may not be doing as great, right, and that's a function of a lot of the factors, everything from FTX to other public markets being down, I think there's still a lot of conviction from the broader ecosystem that the space is continuing to evolve, that the space is not going anywhere, right? And this is the time to build. I think one example that I actually like to give is that sort of FTX and everything else going down over the last 6 months, you could not have built those types of services and products in a decentralized web previously, right? You do rely on things like interoperability, things like high scalability, very simple UXs, and so on and so forth. And so when those products are being created in centralized exchanges, the infrastructure from the decentralized community was not there to support them, right? And I think this is now finally the first year that we're actually starting to see the same level of infrastructure being developed, right? You have Osmosis or fully decentralized DEX. You have interoperability protocols like IBC and Axelar that you can move tokens and bridge liquidity and everything else. You have better UXs where you have direct deposits and so on and so forth. So I think we're finally have, the core fundamentals that are starting to shape place to be able to offer the same type of experiences like, centralized players offered. So I'm super excited. I think we're continuing to build. There's still lots of capital, like I said, in the space, and lots of good problems to solve. And I think we can finally actually start solving them over the coming years. So I'm super excited.
Certainly, from my perspective, I see key primitives that are being built that's going to enable this, crypto-based, fully integrated world that you speak of. There's projects like Notebook that will do client-side ZK proofs to not hold any of your sensitive KYC data on chain, but provide proofs to the chain that you have KYC'd and you say who you say you are, who you say you are. And that's an integral primitive for doing fiat on-ramps without having to go through like a trusted custodian, for example. And I think that's going to be pretty huge. The other thing that I'm seeing in the space where there is a void but a clear demand for is that there's so embedded finance. That's one of those things, like when you go to shop and there's like a PayPal integration or like Visa MasterCard integration. What's missing there clearly is the fact that you can't yet plug in your MetaMask or your Kepler and directly pay for a product. I think when those APIs get built and that integration happens, that's going to be the game changer for crypto. What do you think?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I actually think there is, kind of a couple points on that. So one, I think the integration with kind of a Web2 stacks is going to continue happening, right? Or will only start happening hopefully over the coming years, right? So I think a couple of indicators on that. When we speak more broadly about like where are the new developers that are getting funded this space, right, from investors or other folks, a lot of it actually Web2 developers, right, that are entering the space, right, and that continues to be in the case. So you have a lot of folks that are kind of coming in and bringing in traditional problems, right, and actually want to use crypto and blockchain technology to solve those problems, everything from payments, identity management and things like that. So that's one thing. And I think the second thing, the collapse and everything will hopefully actually put some light in terms of like what are the regulations that are needed to enable some of these integrations, right? So I think like there's a kind of stable coin, Transparency Act that's in the picture, and I think a lot of folks are saying, if that were to go through, that would actually enable a lot of crypto payments, right, to be integrated in a lot of like Web2 front ends and so on and so forth, and like merge MetaMask and Web2 kind of commerce. So I think that would be super exciting once that goes through as well, right? And again, I think it's the technology really is finally starting to become a little bit more mature, right, and acceptable for those things. It's still there's still quite a lot of work to do, but I think we have all the fundamentals now, and I hope that people finally realize what those fundamentals should be, right? It's not a centralized exchange kind of a going and playing with it, like it's actually based on kind of decentralized protocols and technology.
Yeah, it's so sad how some people need to learn things in this way. They need to feel the pain of learning things the hard way to understand that, okay, maybe my old mental model of trusting somebody else to custody my money is not actually the way to go, and that I should start figuring out how to custody my own money. And
Yeah. So I mean, so first, I think it's actually quite unfortunate, right? So I think like for those people that have lost money, right, or were affected, I think like, I feel like really sorry, right? And I think like we have to understand that like many people have actually probably have like their life savings affected and things like that. So it's not it's not a fun situation to be in, and I think that's one thing. But the second thing, I think you actually look at a lot of actual investors, right, that like held money in FTX and things like that, and then after it went down, they're saying what we want FTX to release all the records of all the transactions and everything else that's been going on, right? And I'm like, well, okay, that's a blockchain, right? And you've been playing with a like centralized solution, and some people were saying that they even got their transaction history wiped off, right? Like they don't even know what they lost. They can't even account for taxes and everything else since the FTX filed for bankruptcy. Right? So it's like again, like pretty horrible situation, but like it's a centralized kind of a front end build on top of decentralized technology, which kind of took all the fundamentals out of what it was supposed to provide.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, the mask came off, and I feel like it's unfortunate to I mean, the kinds of questions that I was getting after this collapse was like, what even does decentralization mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, that's that's another topic, but it's a learning curve that people need to get past in order to fully appreciate why decentralized protocols are needed and centralized exchanges are not. So, okay. That being said, Axelar provides a series of different stable coins, right? That gets imported into the Cosmos ecosystem. And one of the more native ones, I would say, because it's built with Cosmos technology, is BUSD. So, and that's one of a number of stable coins that Axelar offers to bridge over. So, can you talk about that? What other stable coins are in the roadmap, if any? And are there any other details like airdrops or any sort of incentives for people to, import more BUSD into Osmosis, for example?
Yeah, so BSD hasn't gone live yet, but it will be going live over the coming, hopefully, week, right? If things go well. So small alpha there. A lot of other stables have been live, for some time, right? Like USDC, the Tether, DAI, and so on and so forth. BUSD will go live pretty soon. I think Osmosis is working on a kind of a bunch of different interesting programs, and they actually have a stable pools that they are creating, right, to actually swap different stables. So I think some of those will go live as well, hopefully. So we'll have to see. And the other interesting thing that was announced is kind of an Axelar airdrop, right, for some of the early users of various bridging capabilities of the network. So the website has gone live. Let me see what's actually URL for this. So if you go to airdrop.axelar.network, you can see kind of high-level details about the airdrop. It's going to focus on 3 different categories of ecosystem participants. Some early satellite users, some NFT robot holders, and folks that bridge to Osmosis in the early integration once that connection went live. So hopefully those programs will start rolling out over the coming weeks as well, and that would be, I think, pretty fun.
Oh, so when is the airdrop actually live?
So I don't have a specific date. Hopefully the first one will go live within 2 weeks.
Okay, got it. And so with supporting these stablecoins, USDC, for example, gets wrapped into AXL USDC. Is it the same thing for BUSD?
Yeah, so exactly, yeah, because these coins originally have been issued, right, on a single chain to kind of move them around. They have to be wrapped, right, and locked and unlocked in a specific way. So yeah, it would be similar instantiation. To the Cosmos ecosystem, it looks like an IBC asset, right, that's coming from Axelar side. So um, essentially what happens is that AXL will represent it as an asset on its own network, right? And then using an IBC connection, that asset can be moved across all of the other Cosmos ecosystems. And on other EVM chains, it's represented as a kind of ERC20 token, right, which is effectively a wrapped representation of the actual asset. We have quite a few, on that pretty interesting projects where people are learning how to launch sort of omni-chain tokens, right, across all of the ecosystems right away, and not have like this lock and unlock model, and it's more like into burn and mint model, which I think is pretty exciting. It's going to change the way these assets are moved across the ecosystems. But the ones that have been issued, right, they're following this kind of lock and unlock model.
When you say multi-chain deployment in one go, are you thinking about XCVM from Composable Finance and how they're doing it? Or what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I'm not sure what is it, XCVM?
So they've built a generalized framework that allows people to deploy over various different ecosystems with different stacks.
I see. I mean, I don't know enough about it, right? I guess what I'm referring to is, so Axelar supports things like general message passing, right, across the ecosystems. And so what that means is you can deploy like your contract on multiple different chains, right? And those contracts talk to one another. And so the basic action, if you want to create sort of an omni-chain token, is an action of sending that token from one chain to another, right? So it would look like no different as a regular ERC20 asset on your chain, but it has an extra function call, right? So that function call allows you to send it to another address on another blockchain, right? And so this contract would then, maybe burn it. It would send like a general message through the Axelar stack to mint the corresponding asset, on another chain, right? So this is a type of a kind of a omni-chain deployment that I'm talking about, and I'm sure there's like many different ways to instantiate it, but I think it's it's a pretty interesting model, and we're actually working on something, with Circle USDC, right, to help actually transition that model to be more composable with DeFi applications, right? So we announced the partnership with them, about a month ago, I think, or maybe a bit more, where they're rolling out kind of their bridge capability to do this native USDC mint and burn functionality, and we're composing it with the rest of the Axelar stack and general message passing, so it can be used as a routing asset across DeFi applications, right? So it enables like a pretty powerful composition in the DeFi primitives themselves.
So there's an attack here. If you do multi-chain deployment on various different EVMs, how do you prevent replay attacks when they use general message passing? So replay attacks meaning, as you share the same hex string, the same hex address for various EVM chains, Avalanche, for example, Polygon, Ethereum. That same address could, the same transaction, let's say you sign a transaction on one chain, that same thing could be replayed on different chains, and that introduces different attack surfaces.
I mean, it can't be, right, if the chains have done a proper job to make sure that they have a unique, chain names, right? So how do you prevent replay attack across all of the EVM chains today? You have the notion of sort of chain ID or chain name, right? And even if you have the same key across multiple different chains, for that transaction to execute on a single chain, you have to sign it with the unique chain ID of that chain, right? And I think we saw this. Actually being debated quite a lot during the Ethereum migration, right? So when they were migrating from proof of stake to proof of work, some people were like, okay, this is going to be forked. And people like, well, what happens if the fork doesn't change the chain name, right? Well, then hopefully the community doesn't adopt it as a good chain. And I think that's what happened, right? So proof of work was forked, the chain name was renamed. And so that means all the transactions on that chain had to be signed with a different with a different nonce, essentially, that could not be replayed across other ecosystems. So the same, technique kind of applies here. And then the final point, to enable the complete root of trust, right, of those messages, you have effectively, Axelar doing the attestation layer, right? So when a transaction arrives at the destination, you check against the gateway, what we call, to make sure that this transaction, came from a certain address on a certain chain, right? And then Axelar attested it, right? You can have additional attestations, on top of it, or so if you want, but that's the basic method of how you establish the root of trust, right? So in a source chain, you have a transaction that's signed with a unique chain name, then Axelar attests that transaction, and then prints on the destination, right, a statement saying this transaction came from this chain, this is the address, and this is the caller. And in your contract, then you verify all those steps and then make a decision whether or not to execute it.
Right. And in that statement, there's a strong backing of social consensus in there.
When you say social consensus, what do you mean?
As in, if the majority concedes that this chain is the chain that it says it is via naming, then it is that chain. Whereas if we all subscribe to the mass hallucination that this other chain is not the chain that it tries to say it is, then it's not.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. I think that's more in terms of, what is the technology and how do we name it kind of a problem, right? And, what do we refer to it as? So, absolutely right. Like when you use an Ethereum and when you sign it with MetaMask, when you install MetaMask and you enable Ethereum as your chain, you are a part of that social consensus in some sense. Same thing, when you install like Kepler, right? Like in Cosmos, and, you can have the same address derived on different chains, right? And, you are a part of that chain of trust assumptions in some sense, right? They still have to be careful about to make sure that everything that you're signing is actually what you intend to sign, right? And that actually brings me, I think to a good another building block that I think is finally starting to become more and more usable is actually things like wallets and things like being able to sign things that what you're signing, right? So I think everybody that used Ledger probably have seen cases where you sign in like a long string, right? Then you have to like click to figure out like what is the string actually does. So I think there's quite a lot of work and projects in the ecosystem that are trying to make this a lot simpler, right? Where you have visibility into, this is what my transaction is. This is exactly what I'm signing. It's sort of much nicer and much simpler represented with a better UX. So you can actually, participate in that social consensus, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So there's a little subtle cue there with that question. The reason I asked that is because for those of you who don't know, it's a subtle difference in ideologies between the Bitcoin camp and the everything else camp, the proof of stake camp. Right. In the Bitcoin camp, it's like, don't need a trust. Nothing's like, social consensus. It's like programmatic consensus via the protocol. Whereas in the proof of stake camp, it's more like, okay, there's like some semblance of social consensus that's going to lead to the direction of where the canonical chain is.
I mean, I guess, yeah, it's a philosophy and it's a camp differences. I guess I'm having a hard time pinpointing exactly what are the technical differences, right, that make this camps differ. Because even in Bitcoin, like you can have the same key being used across other proof of work or proof of chain stakes, and every time in Bitcoin you sign in a transaction, you have to sign it with the the right identifiers and everything else. So yeah, while philosophically, sure. I mean, like practically, I think like if you go through the stacks, I'm not exactly sure like where these technical differences come into play.
Right. We could go into that, but it comes down to like governance, and if like miners decide to execute on it, then there it is. Whereas yeah, in the proof of stake paradigm, it's much more like user activated. Anyway, that's a tangent. So Given that now, so Axelar is preparing to, import and export and be the sort of like hub of stablecoin liquidity, because that's what most of the, like Osmosis Dex, for example, imports most of its stablecoin liquidity from Axelar. Given that it's potentially going to become a huge honeypot, how does Axelar stay secure? As Cosmos gains more visibility over time, hackers are going to start looking at us.
Yeah.
Like, what protocols do you have to make sure this thing is secure?
Yeah, so I would say like the whole stack has been built, from the ground up to address security, right, at its core. And just to walk through some things. So at the very core of it, right, we of course have a decentralized network, right? So Axelar is based on, Tendermint and Cosmos technology. It's an open network. Anybody can become a validator. The better they do, the more delegations they get, right, and so on and so forth. So, the core technology is based on proof of stake, and I think it's a fundamental core starting base that can be decentralized and secure and scalable, right? So that's one. The second of all, a various kind of a consensus layer modification that have to be made to amplify the security. So one example are things like quadratic voting on the network, right? So when it comes to processing cross-chain requests, we actually apply sort of a quadratic voting rule at the network layer to finalize them, right? So, and what that does is that if you end up in a situation where certain number of validators have a very skewed stake in the system, then you can actually mitigate their or minimize their voting power in the consensus, right? So as an example, if you had 4 tokens in traditional proof of stake, you're going to vote with those 4 tokens. In a quadratic voting scheme, you're going to vote with kind of a 2 votes, right, corresponding to 4 tokens, right? So you take a square root of the number of token every participant has, and so that has an effect that if the stake becomes skewed at some point, like you actually still require more and more validators to to execute on the rules of the cross-chain capabilities. So that's one thing. Various things like key rotations in the network are, being implemented, right? So validators have to rotate keys and, pretty standard operational procedures. And then on top of it, there's been layers of kind of security and, I would say operational things that have been doing to secure the network, right? So one example are things like audits, right? So we've done over 30 audits across the stack, right? Every time, kind of contract changes or the network changes, there's like a series of auditors that go through it. All the audits are public, right? So you can go on our GitHub and kind of and go through them and take a look. There is an open bound at Immunify, right, over over 2 million. So if there is a bug, encourage people to kind of follow that process and submit a disclosure. And then there's so that's kind of the second pillar, right, which is like engineering practices that you do and safeguards that you put into the network on top of the right design. And then the third thing, what I call is like application specific add-ons, right? So one example, okay, we support general message passing, but we also support, things like asset transfers, right? And token transfers. So for token transfers, I think pretty important functionality are things like rate limits, right? So the Axelar, implements rate limits at the contracts. It actually implements rate limits at the IBC layer as well, right? So, that update just went live. And what that means is that, worst case, whichever protocol is, has a bug or something, whether or not it's on the IBC side or kind of EVM side, the damage could be mitigated, right, through those rate limits, right? And so, I think those are what I call is application specific add-ons, right? So at the end of the day, kind of the security, no single protocol is immune to all attacks, right? They're all complex, they're all, sensitive. But I think if you have the right design, if you have the right engineering practices, and you have these application specific add-ons, you can build a stack which is sort of trust minimized to the level of comfort of most people.
Okay, sounds good. So, after our last interview, about a year ago, general message passing was announced. So, can you talk a little bit about that and how it works together with IBC, and how the two complement each other to address whatever use case it's trying to address?
Yep, for sure. So I think, as everybody knows, I think the first use case, right, of interoperability has been around token transfers, right? So IBC first rolled out with token transfers. Axelar first rolled out with, token transfer functionality. But I think we want to go beyond that, right? And why? Because I think actually token transfer, is a nice primitive, and it's always will be there as one of the core basic primitives of interoperability. But it doesn't actually allow you to compose applications with one another, right? So every time to move these tokens, we turn humans and we tell them, go to this front end, click from the source chain, destination chain, deposit your token, and what I call is participate as a human router to shuffle your own liquidity, right? Which is great, we can do that, but it's a very manual and kind of a tedious process, right? So how do we do better to allow users to interact directly from any wallet, any asset into the application on the ecosystem that they want, right? And so to do that, what you have to do is you have to program some of their intents into, a program or a message, what we call, right? And so things like general message passing, on Axelar now, in Cosmos, we added this notion of a notes field, right? That's been added into the IBC packet itself. And so in the notes field, you can include an arbitrary message as well, right? And so by combining those two things, you can now pass arbitrary sort of instructions, right, from one ecosystem to another. So as an example, if you have a MetaMask wallet, and you hold in some USDC, you want to swap it for, I don't know, let's call it AVAX, right, on Avalanche. How do you do this with one click, right? So you can write that as an instruction that says, I want to swap, X for Y. Where that instruction will be executed depends on your, preferences, right? So one example, it could actually be routed to Osmosis, right? Because maybe it has the deepest liquidity between, USDC and AVAX. You can actually do a swap there. And then the instruction from Osmosis could say, okay, now route this asset back to, Avalanche and give the user AVAX as a result of it, right? So you can automate all the user's intents into these general messages and then effectively send one transaction that gets executed across 2, 3, or more ecosystems, and the user just does one click, and they get the result that they want. And so I think general message passing is sort of the next evolution in the interoperability. We now have this nodes, in IBC. We have general message passing through Axelar. They're getting combined together, right? So we're doing an upgrade, hopefully over the coming month or so, to the AXL network to compose them together. So all the chains in Cosmos will be accessible from EVM chains via general messages and vice versa, right? And so I think it's going to be super, exciting, rollout that's going to continue, the mission.
That's extremely powerful. So what you're telling me is that it essentially can do DEX aggregation, but in a more lightweight manner. So, right. So the program will, in a smart way, understand the user's intent and programmatically route their transactions in a way that's most optimized in terms of fees, is it? And then give them back the asset that they want, no matter which underlying chain that asset came from.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, and I think the big difference is that especially when you're doing things like DEX aggregation, things like that. Again, a lot of that is actually centralized front ends, to be built to do those things, right? And how do you build it in a decentralized protocol? You need these interoperability stacks and general message passing to facilitate this, right? So yeah, everything from liquidity routing, right, to DEX aggregation properties, to kind of cross-chain borrow and lend type of capabilities, right? You can now automate in a decentralized way and put it on chain.
Excellent. So yeah, that brings me to another thought where if we have decentralized front ends. Well, and when I say decentralized front ends, I just mean many different front ends for accessing the same underlying protocols. How do you mitigate phishing attacks? Or you don't, and you just defer the responsibility to the wallet to warn people that, hey, we don't recognize this one, it looks scammy. You need a scam detector.
I mean, I think it's a great question. I don't have, I think, a full answer, but I think we're going to have to establish some type of roots of trust in some sense, right? Whatever that means, either programmatic or kind of social consents and governance, right? So one example I could imagine, if you have a decentralized front end, maybe it's like its code base is hosted like on IPFS, right? And then if it's a front end, let's say for Osmosis, right, or Uniswap, then the communities of those protocols have to kind of sign right on this hash of the IPFS kind of code base, right? So and then in your front end, in your MetaMask, where you go, like maybe let's say signed by the protocol that you're actually accessing, right? Like and this is the hash and this is the source that has been loaded. So I could imagine this full chain of trust. It does require like some type of a sign-in verification. It does require some integration on the front ends, but I think it's a very interesting but probably solvable problem.
Yeah, certainly. It's one of those things where centralization and trust comes into conflict with decentralization, because if the wallets become your access point into DeFi and like Web3 in general, and the wallets are then telling you whether a front end is reputable or not, then again you're deferring trust to the wallets, and now all the power concentrates and shifts to wallet providers. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's actually a good question, right? And even after FTX collapsed, a lot of people were asking me like, what's the difference if I download like a Ledger or a MetaMask, right, and hold my coins there versus FTX? Don't I trust them, right? And I think the difference is actually settled, but actually fundamentally important that a lot of these technologies, from MetaMask to Kepler and like Ledger, you can you understand what they do. You understand that they generate, keys like on a local device, right? You can look at the code for most of them, and you should, many developers look at the code, understand like that's what it actually does, right? And so while yes, you trust in, kind of the code producers or engineers behind it, but there's a lot of, like, back to your point, like social consents that goes into validating that code base, that validating those protocols, that understanding that the key always generated on your device, it's never exported out, it's never leaked, right? Like you become the owner. And so yes, there is the trust, but that trust can be verified to to a pretty high degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing to note is that it's all self custodying. So you're not actually giving away your coins to somebody else to custody for you and possibly leverage for borrowing and lending to themselves to buy stadiums and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so last thing, Sergey, what's now that we are at the end of the year, what's your outlook for the end of the year? Like for the macro crypto market as well as geopolitically, the entire thing. Where do you think the space is, everything's going?
I mean, I think the next few months is still going to be pretty volatile, right? I think you can see that across all kinds of markets, crypto and non-crypto overall. A lot of it is usually like due to the end of the year for various reasons happens anyways, right? So some people declare like tax losses and things like that, right? So you naturally expect all kinds of price movements. I mean, look, like I think though, kind of just back to the point, I think that the crypto is actually in a very good and a very strong position for the next few years, right? So I think there is still capital, there is still funding. We still see reputable projects continuing to build, right? That manage their treasures correctly, that manage their kind of operational burns and things like that. So I mean, everybody says this, but it is a great time to build. Like I frankly, right, feels like there's a little bit of a pressure relief, right? Because in the bull market, everybody is like, okay, like you need to ship yesterday, right? Because otherwise you kind of are missing out on it. I think in the in the bear market you get a little bit more of a breathing room and say, okay, what do I actually build that can stand here 10 years from now, right? Or 5 years or 20 years from now, whatever the time horizon for your product is. So I think it's a great time to build. It's a great opportunity to engage with communities that actually build and continue working on the core technologies.
What I find unfortunate is that a lot of the retail money has been washed out, but the institutions are still around and they're the ones buying up on the floor. So smart money is still around in the space. And anybody who's listening to this podcast right now is by definition smart money. But what's really sad is that the people who were just speculating in the last market, I guess, paid the price, or lost their stimulus checks if they were still around. So,
Yeah.
Okay, Sergey, are there any housekeeping items that you want to cover? Are there updates that we did not yet cover that you want to talk about?
I mean, I think, yeah, one thing I'll mention is that we actually planning a pretty interesting event at the end of February. It's called Airdrop Summit. Right. So, we have amazing speakers that we're lining up from all kinds of ecosystems, right? Sunny is speaking, a lot of folks from Cosmos, other EVM chains. And the idea behind this summit is actually, let's talk about like what are the other pieces of infrastructure, right, or tooling or developer experiences that are missing, or user experiences that are missing, to help us continue driving this ecosystem forward, right, to help us build this interchain future that we've been talking about for a while. And so I think it'll be a pretty exciting event. I think encourage, again, like for people that are interested in building, interested in participating with communities, to kind of check it out. It'll be at the end of February, and you can check out intropsummit.com for it.
And that's in Miami, right? How many people do you expect to attend, given that it's a bear market?
Good question. I don't know yet. Probably in the orders of hundreds, right? So maybe anywhere from kind of 500 plus or minus.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll see everybody there, right? We'll
Yeah.
see everyone who's listening in Miami next year. All right. That's it. So we did go over the AXL token airdrop details. So that's I'm looking forward to that as somebody who uses Axelar. The Axelar robot. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, because we did not cover your NFT project?
Yeah, so it wasn't our NFT project. It was a MintDAO that actually launched like an omnichain NFT using the Axelar protocol, and that NFT kind of represented a robot. So you can check it out. Like, it's all public contracts and everything, right? And I think some people participated in those NFTs and kind of learned how to have a omni-chain, chain agnostic NFT, right? So they kind of bridge through MintDAO, front end, kind of understand the user experience there. But pretty interesting, and I like the art behind it as well. I thought it was quite well done as well.
So MintDAO, is that a contract hosted on Axelar, or is it on an EVM chain?
Yeah, so MintDAO deploys their contract across all EVM chains that are supported by Axelar, right? So it's they deployed them on Polygon, I think on Ethereum, right, on Avalanche, on Moonbeam, and those contracts, just the same way as we talked about like omnichain token, right? These contracts give you kind of an omnichain NFT capabilities, right? So you can generate an NFT that's automatically available across all these ecosystems. You can move it around back and forth, and it kind of works in this burn and mint model, right, as opposed to kind of lock and unlock model from the get go.
So where does Axelar fit into that? So they deploy through multiple EVMs, and then they
and so actually used
Axelar?
as a general message passing, right, across these EVM contracts, right? So as you move your NFT from one chain to another, you are relying on Axelar to pass that message and call the contract on the other chain.
Got it. All right. Cool. So that sounds like it augments IBC's capabilities. So that means that those EVM chains don't need any bridges in between, or they don't need to bridge between, like, let's say Arbitrum to Ethereum and then to Optimism. They could directly bridge or transfer as if they had IBC in between Arbitrum and and optimism.
Yeah, I mean, Axelar are by default, right, as a network has been designed to support many-to-many connectivity, right? So meaning that any ecosystem that's plugged in can automatically interoperate with everything else, right? How those pairwise connections are done, it depends on what protocols are available in those ecosystems, right? So for Cosmos, we have IBC. For EVM chains, we have our own protocol. If another, EVM chain or something else rolls up with, ZK or IBC or anything else, you can still plug that in as a pairwise connection to Axelar, but then you automatically get to benefit from all the other interconnected ecosystems, thanks to this kind of many-to-many routing architecture.
Yeah, so the way that IBC is the dominant message passing protocol in the Cosmos ecosystem, is general message passing protocol the dominant one across EVM chains, or is there more competition in that arena?
Across EVM chains?
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely, some other protocols. I would say all of them are pretty, kind of centralized, that I don't think do much, right? It's kind of a small multi-sig that's set between a couple different EVM chains, and they just validate all the requests that are going in and out. So Axelar is the only decentralized, actually, like proof of stake based protocol that works across all of those EVM chains.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So if somebody uses GMP, is there consensus involved?
There is consensus, right? So kind of as you send in, so let me kind of quickly trace the flow of transaction, right? You go from, let's say, one chain Ethereum, let's say, to like another EVM chain like Avalanche. You send a message to what we call as a gateway, right? The gateway is a router. Okay, so at home you have a router. It receives messages from your local computer. In that case, that gateway will receive the messages from that chain. And then Axelar network validators will run a consensus to say where that message needs to go. Okay, if it's a message that addressed to Cosmos, then they translate it into IBC packet format and route it to the Cosmos. Right. If it needs to go to another EVM chain, then Axelar validators prepare a message that needs to be routed into the other EVM chains. If it's Move chain or Aptos, then they'll prepare a message for that and then route it there. Right. So it serves as kind of this hub of many translation layers of all these ecosystems that you can use. How the validators reach a consensus, again, like depends on the pairwise connection to that chain, right? Whether or not it's IBC or kind of Axelar protocol for connecting to EVM chains. But the core functionality of many-to-many routing is kind of chain agnostic.
Got it. So that makes Axelar a truly omnidirectional chain.
That's right.
Perfect. All right. Well, Sergey, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. We are at the very end, and I think we've covered everything that you guys have going on pretty comprehensively. So thank you so much for providing the alpha.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. It was great chatting as always.
Yes. And yep, good luck to all of you guys in this bear market. We're going to survive through for maybe another year, and then things will be